Hey guys, comment YouTube starting. Hey guys. Hello guys. No, hello guys. What am I doing? I don't know how I should introduce myself. Hey guys. Hello guys. Hi guys. But hello guys. Welcome back to the Mensa game. And I hope everyone's having a brilliant week and day filled with prosperity, happiness, and also health. And hope everyone's having a brilliant week and day as well at work, university, or whatever you are doing. So I'm going to kickstart this episode and let's talk about the thing we're going to be talking about today, which is moving on. And this is connected to relationships with people, objects, roles, things, scenarios, and so on. And what is moving on? Okay, so I'm going to make a little what do we call it? Little learning roadmap as to what we will be covering in today's episode. We will be covering what is moving on and what does that entail. And then we're going to be talking about moving on from relationships with people, moving on from relationships with jobs and roles, and also moving on from places and things. Now, I'm going to try to break all of these down. If I don't, I think I may release a corresponding episode where I talk about the other aspects. And depending on the aspects I leave out, I'll make sure I make a corresponding episode to talk about them and see how we go on, go on. So what is moving on? Essentially so hard but essentially moving away. It's about separating yourself and moving in another direction. It's leaving the path you once had and moving ahead. It's about growing. I think that's another great word to connect with moving on. It's growing from a once in a past situation and accordingly growing. And that's what moving on is. I'm moving on. I'm growing. I'm becoming a better me. So just to summarize again, so that we totally understand what moving on is, I'm going to break down moving on as essentially growing and developing as an individual / person. Okay? And that's moving on. And as simple as that, I'm not going to go so into depth or in depth into what moving on is because there's not a whole lot of science behind it, nor do I have the scientific background to sort of explain or the literature background to explain moving on in depth and all that. But in simple terms, it's growing and developing into the person and you want to be essentially. Okay? So the first aspect of moving on that everyone could relate to is moving on from relationships with girlfriends, boyfriends, and relationships don't even include that. They could also include friendships. So, for example, and this is more prominent in a way with friendships. As of recently, I've met up with a few of my friends from back in high school, and yeah, it was an interesting scenario because during the time I met up with them and during my alone time when after meeting up with them, I started to think that, I didn't really connect with them. I didn't really connect with them and I didn't really, the connection we once had wasn't really cultivated. So it got me thinking of, are we essentially moving on? That was when the term coined, sorry. And essentially, I realized that people are moving on whenever there's no energy and whenever, especially in a friendship, when you meet an old friend of yours and there's no energy, one thing you could sort of attribute it towards is that you both are moving on. You're both in different chapters of your life. You're both in different sort of timings of your life where you're dealing with different things and you're on different paths, career wise, family wise, and personal circumstances wise as well. So when meeting up with an old friend, you may feel disconnected. And I think that's completely normal because you both are moving on and growing into people which are totally different, which are growing into people and going from who you once were to another person, which is how life is. You grow from a person who, for example, was once quiet and very timid to now a person who's very sort of extroverted maybe or more talkative or less shy. So every day people are growing in regards to personality, in regards to interests, in regards to skills, in regards to who you are as a person, in regards to your identity and soul and aura. Just change and grow as time progresses. And often that creates a disconnect with people you once knew. Your old friend of yours, you may not connect with them because you realize, yeah, stuff has changed. I'm developing into a different person. And hence why I don't really feel connected with this person because I don't really have the same interests anymore. We don't have the same sort of connections anymore or vibe anymore, if you know what I mean. You realize we're both in different phases of our life as well. And it's completely normal. Often I used to beat myself up whenever I did not connect with somebody, especially one of my old friends. But now I just realize that we may be moving in different paths. We're growing in different ways. We are different people at the end of the day. And it's something you can't just avoid. You have to embrace it. Because if you avoid it, in a way, you're regressing your ability to grow. You're saying, no, I have to stay the same person that I was in the past in order to maintain these relationships. But that's impossible. Because each and every day you're experiencing so many things, which essentially are indirectly enabling you to grow into a different person, right? We're growing into different people, and it's completely normal if you don't connect with certain people. And this could even be strangers in a way. At times, I also beat myself up when, I'm not really connecting with strangers, right? Not strangers, people at office, people, in my life, if you know what I mean, and you don't connect with them. But then you sort of realize that we're in different paths. And not even that, we're in different phases of our life where we're growing into different people and we have different interests and our energies are different and our vibes are different. What we prioritize is different. We're different people. And what makes human life so beautiful is that, especially friendships, is that the best friendships are developed when energies sort of intersect and they maintain that sort of intersection where you both are growing together and you both are sort of on the same page in life, if you know what I mean. You both, for example, are growing towards a specific career. You want to achieve something. You both have a purpose to help people. You both have the purpose to value introspection and philosophical discussions, for example. And that's when that sort of energy connects. And you feel, I believe this, the soul, to be honest, the souls just connect. And that's when a bond is created. And this gets me on to another point. These bonds are sometimes very strong, and sometimes this bond results in a relationship being defined. A relationship, a romantic relationship, either a girlfriend, a boyfriend, or whatever, right? This strong bond and a strong sort of intersection creates a relationship. Now, many of you are probably asking, right, my relationship just broke off. My girlfriend and I, for example, just broke off. We broke off and yeah, how can I move on? Because we developed such a strong bloody bond, we have that intersection, our souls connect, and we have that really, really strong bond. How the hell do I move on? And that's one of the, I think if we could sort of develop methodologies to cope with this, I could get £10 million because I found the biggest solution to one of the biggest problems in life. It's not a problem, rather, it's more of a scenario in life, and many people deal with, and it's completely normal. You're obviously going to feel heartbroken whenever this bond is sort of broken because of certain scenarios and so on. But again, it's essential to move on and grow as a person. And it's so easy to say, but you have to put yourself into that mindset in order to develop as a person. I'm going to say, but you're happy and you're not letting that situation break you down, take you down, and diminish you of sort of progress in life in regards to self-development, career, or family relationships, or traveling, or whatever. You don't let that break you down and define who you are. You have to move on. You have to get into that mindset of moving on. You're probably asking, how the hell do I move on? Well, that's very, very good question. It's very good, and yet again, it's very subjective. There are many methodologies on moving on, and there are harmful methodologies, and there's very good methodologies. I'm going to touch upon the harmful harmful methodologies. The first methodology could be, for example, drinking alcohol. That could be one methodology of moving on. But again, as I define moving on is essentially growing in a forward direction. Growth is always in a forward direction. I never heard of growth regressing. So moving on, if you're drinking, you're not growing, you're regressing in a way. If you're drinking for the wrong reasons, right? If you're drinking for the wrong reasons, you're regressing, in my opinion, because you're running away from your problems rather than dealing with them head on. You're essentially putting a band-aid over the wound, a big cut wound, instead of actually building the wound and stitching the skin together, if you know what I mean. So another harmful methodology of moving on, or rather regressing, is, for example, smoking, or any bad deed, any way of releasing high levels of dopamine And you can probably think of any bad way of maybe binge eating food, binge watching some shows until realize that so much time has passed and what have I been doing? I've been putting so many band-aids over this wound and it hasn't actually sort of cured itself, if you know what I mean. I've been just avoiding the issue. So those are all the harmful ways, and you can see you're not moving forward, rather you are regressing. You're moving backward because you're running away from the problem instead of facing them head on. So what are good ways of moving on? And again, this is subjective. The good ways are very subjective. For example, one person may love reading books. They may love reading books. They may start reading about self-development, improving themselves in regards to how they approach certain situations in life, how they maintain their mental health and mental well-being, or it could be even, storybooks, for example. It could be how they could sort of take themselves into another dimension, enjoy reading as time to sort of cultivate introspection in a way. Another thing I like is going to the gym, going to the gym, working out, whether that's boxing, whether that's sort of lifting weights. I love lifting weights. Our brother introduced me to it around 2 years ago, and I think it's absolutely a blessing, because it just puts myself in a right frame of mind and say, I'm actually working on myself here. I'm moving on. I'm developing as a person. I'm developing strength. I'm developing confidence in my own body. I also enjoy cooking. I enjoy cooking healthy food. I enjoy, that time of introspection, to be able to think, release stress, and also utilize my creativity and develop it as well. What's another thing I like? I also like watching movies, and I don't think that's detrimental unless you're doing it extensively. I like watching movies. I like my hobbies. I like doing things I enjoy. And, I like sort of prioritizing my self-development. And, there's so many things I could focus on which are so beneficial for moving on slash growing into the person you want to become, right? And those are all the ways, and I really sort of emphasize on utilizing the right ways to move on. These harmful methodologies, smoking and high dopamine releasers, which essentially put band-aids over the issue rather than actually stitching the skin together, is a bit hefty. But at the same time, you could also say the same with the good methodologies of moving on, which is reading a book, going to the gym, boxing. How are you, and you're probably asking, how is that actually stitching the skin together? How is that dealing with the issue head on? Well, most of the time when you're indulging in these sort of activities, going to the gym, focusing on self-development, reading a book, you're in introspection. And what you realize is that you're cultivating, you're thinking a lot, and you're examining your life. When you start examining your life, you start to become aware. And when you're aware, you take certain actions and you execute those actions in order to better your life. Many of the time, we don't give ourselves enough time to think, enough time to examine our lives. Where's our life heading? How can we sort of optimize it? How can we sort of take action to regulate our emotions, right? We don't have enough time, and especially when we indulge in activities which are detrimental. Drinking. When you're drinking, you don't have enough time to think. When you're binge watching shows, eating junk food and all that, I don't think you have enough time to think philosophically as well about yourself, about where you're heading. You don't have time to deeply think. But when you indulge in these positive ways of growing as a person, for example, you go to the gym, and while you're in the gym, probably listening to music maybe as well, you start to realize that what is important in my life? What is important? You start to realize developing as an individual is important. Self-love is important. Self-acceptance is important. Confidence is very important. And you realize that I need to develop as a person, and I enjoy doing this. You find that's your dopamine. That's your dopamine, which is improving as an individual. And that's super powerful. That's super powerful. When you indulge in self-development and reading books, you're thinking. And every time I read a book, I relate it to my life. For example, if I'm reading a book about the Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins, I'm thinking about how can I implement this in my life? What scenarios can I implement this in? What scenarios are the most prominent in my life? How can I utilize this and so on. So these are such healthy ways of moving on because you're stitching the wound by essentially developing areas of your life which were once not developed. Moving on is also is hard. Let me tell you, it's very hard. Everything in life is hard. Whenever I say something is hard, I remember someone telling me everything in life is hard. Every single thing in life is hard, you know. But you have to take the steps to do it. Unless, yeah, unless you don't want to do it, which is up to you at the end of the day. You know, it's up to you. Do you want to grow as a person? Do you want to move on? Do you want to become the person you want to become? Do you want to attract the people you want to attract in your life? Do you want to attract the things you want to attract in your life? Then you've got to move on, dude. You got to move on. Because if you are stuck in the past and you're letting situations break you down and you're moving into those wrong ways of moving on, like smoking, drinking, and not being productive and, you know, not facing the issue head on, you're not it's gonna be super hard to attract the things you wanna attract and tend and cultivate a sense of happiness, you know? And yeah, I've done that for quite a long time. Done that for quite a long time. And often you have that urge to go back into your old, into that habits, into those old relationships. Say you broke off a relationship with somebody, one of your friends. You have that urge to, you know, or, you know, not friends rather. Let's take a relationship with a, you know, girl, for example. I'm taking a relationship with a girl. You know, you have the urge to amend things, which are completely fine. But yet again, it's sort of the fact that sometimes you've got to move on. You've got to realize and accept the fact that things are different now. And I've got to develop and cover the wound, and it'll never be covered in a way because I'll be slightly open whenever. But I've got to learn from the situation because that's why the wound is open. You got to look at it in that way. The wound is open for me to learn. What can I learn from the past and how can I sort of implement it in the future? And yeah, I've just gotten this experience as of lately, moving on. Seriously, I've got to move on with so many things in my life. So many things I've got to move on. Friendships. Yeah, I'm going to talk about other aspects of life, but there's so many things I've got to move on. And I'm realizing the importance of moving on because it is so powerful to growing as an individual is tremendously powerful. You feel like you are actually you're rather proactively dealing with issues rather than running away or rather than trying to put a band-aid over the issue. You're actually dealing with the issue and I'm growing as a person and it's so good when you grow as a person because you realize there's a life ahead of you. There's a life ahead of you with so many opportunities, and this one situation is not gonna cut your legs off and not allow you to move. Rather, it's gonna make your legs go bigger and bigger so that you can take bigger strides in life, achieving more and growing more as an individual. So that's my experience, you know, and I think I gotta make that video because it's been kind of tormenting me and you know, connected to the last episode. I have my relationships with people and yeah, I had my relationships with people, but you know, they didn't really end the way I wanted to end them. But in a way, it's also like the fact that I'm glad they didn't end that way, you know? I'm glad because I've learned so much and I have the opportunity to learn about the moving on theorem. The moving on theorem is so strong, and it's not even a theorem, it's just a bloody sentence. Move on, you know? But we can make it into a theorem where whenever we're caught up in a situation, whether we should revert back to the old ways of doing things, we can sort of click back and say, I can implement the moving on theorem. I can utilize good ways to grow as an individual and learn more things and achieve more things and actually deal with the issue head on so that doesn't linger in my brain. I don't tend to things which are bad. So yeah, it's a powerful theorem. And I think I enjoy talking about these kind of things because they impact me on a day-to-day basis. And it's going to impact me even more in the future because this is normal. Let me 100% say this again. This is normal. You feeling this way is normal. But the power is with how you regulate it. It's about how you control it and how you actually progress and be proactively. I'm just saying words now. And how you proactively move on in life, right? That is the beauty of it. And it'll always be the beauty of it. Moving on, growing as an individual, becoming a better me. And I love saying that. I love saying that. Becoming a better me. But what else is better in life? Becoming a better me. Seriously. It gives me goosebumps, literally. I just want to become a better me. Every single day I wake up, I want to grow. I want to move on. I want to realize that, geez, you know, I have so much to learn in my life. And it's time to move on, especially with situations which are holding me back. It's time to move on, you know. I think I'm rambling now. I think I'm rambling, but yeah, that's a clear essence of today's video. Appreciate you guys joining me today. And yeah. Thanks, guys. A little homework for you guys. Take back home today. Give me simple homework, and I want to give you guys some homework. I hope some of you guys are staying till the 25-minute mark. For the guys who are, thank you. So I want you to get a piece of paper. I like pieces of paper. I don't like digital stuff. Piece of paper, a pen. I want you to write down the situations, or rather, I want to write down the friendships and relationships which you haven't moved on from and you're constantly thinking about. And you're trying to amend them, but for the wrong reasons. And you know you should move on. I want you to write those situations down, or rather, any situation down. Any situation as to when situation that you need to move on from, just write them down. It could be that, oh, I need to move on from this job. Oh, I need to move on from this relationship. Oh, I need to move on from this friendship. Oh, I need to move on from this location. Oh, I need to move on from these habits, and so on. Stuff like that. And then on a separate column, I want you to write down productive ways of moving on. And another column, if you want, you can write down the ways you will not approach this situation. For example, that could be the unproductive ways of approaching it. I also want you to write the title clear and heavy. I want you to write moving on is growth. I want you to write that down. And in each column, for example, in the productive ways of moving on, you can also say slash growth. In the unproductive ways of moving on, you can say slash regression. And that's your homework. If you want to do it, I'm going to do it today night because I think it's very important for me. And I'm going to do it. Share your homework if you manage to reach this 26 mark. If you did, thank you. And I'll see you next week because I absolutely love doing this. It's my passion and I love talking to you guys. See you guys and have a brilliant week ahead. Bye bye.